Welcome to Transformed and Transformational, a Teach Beyond podcast. I'm Kian.
And I'm Heather. We're here to explore what it means to be transformed in our own lives and how that overflows to living lives of transformational impact in our communities.
And we are back for another bonus episode in between season 5 and season 6.
It really hasn't been that long since the last bonus episode and since the end of season 5, so it's almost like we never left.
Yes, but we do have a longer pause coming between seasons starting now.
Yes, this is true. So this one's the last one for a little while. And we're releasing this just before the International TCK Day, which is the perfect time to share about Michèle Phoenix's new book, Pieces of Purple, The Greatness, Grit, and Grace of Growing Up MK.
We've had Michèle Phoenix on the podcast before, all the way back on episode 22. And that episode is a great listen if you haven't heard the term third culture kid or TCK before, or if you want a refresher on that. We'll link to that in the show notes.
I'm so glad we get to talk with Michèle again today. Let's go over to that conversation now. Well, Michèle, there aren't many people who've been on this podcast more than once, so welcome back to the podcast. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you when it isn't the pandemic and I'm not locked away in my mom's house in Canada.
Yes, that's true. I forgot that's when we talked. Yeah. It's great to be able to have another conversation.
Thank you. We are so excited to have you back. You are a friend of the podcast.
Yes, that's great.
When you were on the podcast last time, we talked about TCKs. We've talked about TCKs in a number of our episodes over the past 5 seasons. And we know that it's your own personal story. It's what you've experienced, but it's also your whole ministry is focused on serving children of missionaries. And I know that's what you spent so much time thinking about and learning about. So I'm curious if there's anything you're noticing or learning that's new to you. That's something surprising, new as you're learning about TCKs.
Yeah, I'm actually just working on a new post, and I'm learning so much in the process of researching on attachment styles and trying to apply that to how they're formed by missionary parents into their children, and then how that might affect the faith of their children as God being the father would kind of connect parental styles to expectations of the divine. So I'm learning a lot about that, and I continue to learn about deconstruction. I think that's going to be the topic that we're covering for a lot of years, maybe decades. And having just been to an MK school in Kenya and had a session with their TCKs there, their teens there on this topic, there's a lot more for us to uncover and address on that subject matter.
Yeah. I so appreciate how you, as Kian said, this is your own experience. You've spent a lot of years of ministry in this area, and you're still like, yes, these are the things I'm learning and working and researching and writing about. Like it's a lifelong learning experience. And that's true whenever we're talking about interacting with people and understanding people, that we don't put people in boxes, but we can notice patterns and learn from that. And so we're excited to be learning from you today.
Well, and people don't exist in a vacuum, right? So the people that I grew up with, the TCKs that I grew up with, and then the ones I taught at Black Forest Academy for 20 years, they were a product of their time and all those influences and the culture and, the global things that were happening. And today's MKs are being formed by things that I didn't experience when I was a TCK. So that's why the learning curve is ongoing, because these are fresh new perspectives that they're bringing to the MK sphere.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you recently released a book. Congratulations. That book is called Pieces of Purple. And so we'd love to know why this book, why now for this book, and what were you hoping to contribute to or share a certain audience in writing this book in particular?
Yeah. It's really, in great part, it's what I would call a legacy piece. I am a single woman. I don't have children. I want the accumulation, the totality of everything that I've learned and researched and taught and written on in my lifetime to live past me. Not that I'm planning on dying anytime soon, but it's always on my mind that at some point, when I'm no longer here to say the things I say, will they still be out there somewhere for people to receive? And I have for years kept a podcast and a blog. The podcast is actually just the audio version of the blog articles that I write, but more and more people just don't have the time, the bandwidth, the whatever energy to go hunting for articles and a long list of articles on a podcast or in a list of blog posts. And I thought maybe it would be easier just to be able to put a book into their hands that
Mm.
is the totality of everything I know, except attachment styles. I didn't get
Yeah,
there
yeah.
yet when I wrote the book.
Version
Um,
2.
that's right. That's right. It's the next edition. And then miraculously, earlier this year, between September and December, I had no major travel on my schedule. And I
Mm.
met with a church that supports me, and they said, "What do you have planned?" And I'm going to write a book, kind of came pouring out of my mouth, which was not
Oh.
intentional to say. And then I felt like, okay, now I'm committed.
Yes.
So between September and December, I was able to just gather everything and gather new research. There's a lot of new content in there as well. And I served with a wonderful MK by the name of Elise Chung over the summer, and she's a graphic artist. So she took over that piece. And one of my greatest joys about this book is how it looks, because I think it's just
Mm.
really pretty on the
Mm.
page. But I'm thrilled to
Yeah,
have it out there. It's been well received.
that's great.
Yeah. And anybody who wants a copy can go find it on
Yeah.
Amazon.
Yes. Yes. We'll be sure to link that in the show notes, don't worry.
Can you tell us, as you're writing the book, who is the audience you're picturing reading this book? Who's the people you're trying to engage with?
That was the challenging part. So
Mhm.
Mm.
the information in there I think is valuable both for MKs of any age, and I think the book can be read probably from ages 13, 14 on, but also for parents, because if we're looking for transformation or change in the world of TCKs, it's got to come from the people who are raising them primarily, and then we can move out from there in kind of concentric circles. So the book is intended for both readers, and they will get different things from it. And at the end of every chapter, there's a QR code that takes you to discussion questions that are formatted as discussion questions for TCKs and for their
Mhm.
parents. So
Mhm.
hopefully there's a little bit for everybody in there. And it ends, the last two chapters are an address to TCKs first, and then an address to their parents. So both
Mhm.
are represented.
Is you're writing this book, is it like an academic book? Is it research and surveys or something, or is it story? What is the book kind of
Yeah, it's not
genre?
academic. That was my primary goal, was for it not to be academic, which is why I was so glad that Elise could make it look like not an academic book.
Mhm.
It's full of stories. My publishing career has been primarily novels, so I really value how story can communicate truths in an accessible way. So it's a lot of my story in there. I was an MK who grew up in France and ate, croissants in the back acres of a 18th century castle where my parents taught. And so I wanted also to honor my story while shedding light on the stories of others. So it does have research in it. There's a lot of really good, well-founded truth in it, but it's woven through with stories
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
personal anecdotes, and a lot of quotes from MKs. There are 50 quotes
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
MKs that are highlighted as well.
Amazing.
I love how a story-driven book, the way that you've woven it, can also really, really easily and clearly lead to learning and next steps. You
Yeah,
haven't just told stories and hope that people learn something. There's
yeah,
also really clear, conclusions or ideas that we'll dive into today. So that would be
yeah,
great.
yeah. Thank you.
The book is called Pieces of Purple, and I'm curious where that title comes from. What does that mean?
Yeah. Pieces of Purple is the title of the book. And there is no purple on the cover because I didn't want to be too on the nose about it. But the significance of the purple is an illustration that was developed by MTI in Colorado Springs. It's an organization that does a lot of debriefing and actually pre field stuff with missionary and third culture families as well. And the way it goes is that people who have grown up in one culture and are embedded and comfortable in that culture, who move overseas, are like beads. So you take a jar, you throw in some red beads that represent the original culture of this person, and then you throw in some blue beads as well. And you mix them together, and you have red and blue beads that are mixed up in the jar. And the significance of this is that people who have a strong grounding in one culture and add other cultures will maintain some form of clarity about who they are and what their cultural makeup is. You can see the red and blue beads, you can differentiate them from each other. There's clarity, there's distinction. You can put them into two stacks if you need to. The MKs are more like red and blue balls of Play-Doh. So when they grow up during their formative years, which is right there in the definition of what a TCK is, when they grow up between cultures with multiple inputs, they absorb them into their identity as they would if you took red Play-Doh and blue Play-Doh and mixed them together, they would become this ball of purple. And most TCKs, that's exactly what they are. They are not confused necessarily, but they are so complex. And it's a beautiful purple. It's a rich and irreplaceable purple, but there is work that needs to be done to understand exactly what shaped them and what it shaped them into. And one of the important points here is to note that even parents who have lived cross culturally for 30 or 40 years will never fully understand in an embodied way what it means to have grown up with all of these cultural and experiential and all of these other inputs shaping who you are.
Yeah, that picture really helps us to understand the difference and have that visual in our minds. And I love the idea that purple is the third culture, the culture that is created, that third color. And you talk about different cultures as fragments that form MKs in your book, the adoptive culture, the passport culture, and the missionary culture. So I'm thinking, you geared this book towards TCKs, MKs, and their parents, but also what's important for educators, other caregivers, and the parents of MKs to know and remember about these different cultures.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just give you one point on each of the three. So, with regard to the adoptive culture, I've just talked about the absorption that happens into the purple of MKs and TCKs. The other element of that is that it's indiscriminate. Where adults who are more like the red and blue beads can put it through a grid, can put input through a grid, is this something we agree with? Is this something new to us? Is this something we should question or explore more? The TCK is just going to absorb it all into who they are. So the indiscriminate years of absorption, which is when TCKs are formed, might mean that they could behave or say things or even believe things that don't fit neatly into the family's kind of set of values or into their organization's values or even into their current culture's values because they've just absorbed it all and it's all mixed into that color of purple. So if you are in relationship with TCKs, whether you're an educator or a parent or a friend of the family, and you notice them saying things or mentioning things they believe that are a little different from what you would expect from them, or behaving in a way that might be off-putting or shocking, I do encourage you to begin by asking questions because what you're seeing might be absolutely normal and acceptable in other places that have shaped their purple, and they just might need a little bit of guidance, a few questions. So, is this something that you do in this other place you call home? And just so you know, in this place, it's might be misunderstood at this as this or this. So helping them to figure out their purple, not in red and blue beads ways because they'll never be that, but just to find some clarity in the mix that's inside them. The second culture I mentioned in the book is the passport culture. And I'll just really briefly say that for a lot of TCKs, and I know you've covered this before on the podcast, it's expected to be home to them. They have a passport, so it should be home to them. But just to encourage your TCKs to approach that culture the way they would approach a completely foreign, say a remote village in some jungle some way, to use the exact same skill set that they would use for that in a culture that they might also feel like they know better than others. But the curiosity, the looking for patterns, the extending grace and understanding, and trying to find a way that they can fit into this culture in a way that isn't shocking or off-putting to others. At least initially, they need to be their full selves at some point. But applying all of those skills that are innately ours to this culture that is supposed to be home will make their transition back a whole lot easier, even if it's just for a summer, as so many missionary families do. And then the missionary culture, all I will say about this is that it's in great ways associated with the word should. So, because I'm an MK, particularly true of MKs more than TCKs because of the spiritual component that forms their family service, the shoulds are a really strong factor that influence even up until their mental health. It can influence them just in their own self perception and their behavior and everything. It can also have an impact on their mental health. And the shoulds are unrealistic expectations that nobody might have spoken to them, but they assume people are expecting of them. There's a difference between an instruction, which understands apprenticeship, we're going to keep trying until we get to this end goal that we have, and shoulds, which say if you fail at this, this, and this, then you bring shame on yourself, on your family, on the work they do, and on God Himself. So looking for shoulds in TCKs is really important for people who are taking care of them, whether it be teachers, again, or administrators or family or resident staff, because that's going to shape their inability to live up to them, is going to shape how they view themselves. And some of them are absolutely ridiculous. Like they should speak 5 languages. They should be perfect all the time. They should always pretend everything is okay. They should never feel sad or wistful or disagree with decisions the parents are making. They should be superior in every way to everybody around them at age 6. And if you can imagine the burden that that places on the shoulders of some TCKs, some are able to just shrug it off, but others are not. That's an important part of the missionary culture that we need to verbally address, because the nonverbal messaging they're getting needs to have that really strong, repeated verbal contradiction from the people that care the most about them.
Let's take a short break from our episode. Michelle, would you be willing to read from the closing of your book, Pieces of Purple?
I would be happy to. This is actually towards the very end of the book, and it kind of summarizes the purpose and the heart behind it. So this is Interstitial Spaces. Like some of you reading this, my parents felt drawn to missions well before I was born, so I didn't choose to grow up haunting the halls and grounds of an 18th century castle, but I loved every cornice, squeaky floorboard, and hidden stairwell. I didn't choose to speak 2 languages before I'd mastered either of them, but I sure loved being able to code switch on cue without ever having to think through the transition. And having that multilingual panoply of vocabulary to choose from, a veritable Disneyland for a mind like mine, always hunting for words that illuminate, perplex, and reinvent. I didn't choose France, but I'm so blessed that she lives inside me now. Her magic and a flickering kind of love skip like pebbles across the memories of my childhood, moments of profound, indelible joy, beauty that anchored in the marrow of my soul, a depth of experience and discovery that illuminates my past with the warmth of honest gratitude. I didn't choose the hard things either, the austere classrooms where teachers tried to tame me, the trauma, the challenges and pain, the seasons of lostness, or the wounds of isolation. But I lived them, and I survived them. Like so many MKs before and after me, I've come to understand the risk, the rarity, and the richness of this purple we share. I've sought in these pages to paint the black and whites in such a way that they reveal the gold that shimmers in our interstitial spaces. There is hope and there is healing for the TCKs, MKs, and international families still walking this road paved with beauty and resilience. Being a TCK is indescribable. It is hovering darkness. It is glimmering light. May we embrace the wonderful as we wrestle with the hard, and may the God who cherishes his purple people reach through the layers that make us so unique to touch the parts that need his love and free us up to flourish.
For our weekly spotlight, we're focusing on schools that serve third culture kids. There are a lot of opportunities to serve TCKs with Teach Beyond all around the world, so you can check out the opportunity board to learn more. Visit teachbeyond.org/go or click on the link in the show notes.
And now back to our conversation with Michelle.
You know, Michelle, one of the things I appreciate most about your work is how you hold tension for some of these difficult topics, or, the reality that this exists, and also what can we do to make it better or to bring change. And personally, I love the concept that two things can be true at the same time, even if they seem like they're opposing. In fact, a lot of people in my life know me for the phrase hold both. I've probably shared about this on the podcast before too. So I love that you use the word flip sides in your book to talk about two things that can be true about an MK. Like they have extraordinary lives and ordinary challenges, or they have rare abilities and deficient skills. So I don't know, do you want to briefly touch on the idea of flip sides, or maybe even dive deeper into one or two of those?
I think they're essential. They're an essential notion to having a balanced assessment of our lives,
Mm,
because we can either focus fully on the wonderful, and then we
mhm.
have this kind of Disneyland version of what we've experienced, or
Yeah.
we can focus only on what's hard, and then we have a very pessimistic and dark view of what our lives have been. Being
Yeah.
able to hold both, as you said,
Yeah.
being able to acknowledge the great and address the hard allows us to live wholly as a whole person in these
Mhm.
very complicated lives of ours. So,
Mhm.
a couple examples of these flip sides would be that we have a 3D understanding of the world. When we see the country on the news or in a magazine, as if people still read magazines online on Google, um, we might see the place and immediately we're kind of rushed back there in our minds. The sights, the sounds, the languages, the way they interact with each other, the cadence of life, all of that comes to us. And that is such a beautiful thing. I love stepping off a plane in Europe and feeling my Europeanness descend over me like a cloak. I
Yeah.
love it. At the same time, we might also have some traumatic experiences associated with our understanding, our bone deep understanding of that place. So there are
Mm.
MKs. Just a few years ago, to give you an example, a young lady was in a reentry retreat, and we did show and tell, and they brought out homemade pottery from the countries where they came, or whatever it was, a poncho. And this young lady left the room and came back in dressed head to foot in a hazmat suit because that was what she
Wow.
remembered of the place where she grew up and that she had recently left, where Ebola was raging, where her father was a doctor who was in touch with patients every day. And anytime they saw each other, they were all decked out in
Wow.
these hazmat suits. And to her, it was kind of this curiosity, look at what I have, look at how we lived. But there's an attachment there to trauma
Mhm.
that is maybe balanced out by the wonderful of everything she saw and experienced during her days in that country. And being able to acknowledge both will help her to find that middle ground of stability between I hate it,
Yeah.
I love it, or I
Yeah.
want it and I fear it, right?
Yeah.
So that's just one example. Another example is that we have so many skills and we have so much understanding. We're so savvy in so many areas and we're so useless in other areas because we haven't lived in our passport culture a lot of times. That's when we realize it the most. So we might be able to do, basic dental work on people that we grew up with in the village where
Huh.
our parents served, or, purify water or build wells or build homes. But we come back to our passport culture and we don't know how to order at Subway restaurants because
Sure.
we have this skill set that's just uneven.
Yeah.
And you won't feel stupid at the Subway if you remember, yeah, but I have all these other things I can do. And you won't feel overly proud doing all these other things because you remember that Subway is your major challenge when you go back to your passport culture.
That's so helpful to think about as we think about how they might process different things in different levels. And I love that in your book, you don't shy away from the difficult topics. Like you mentioned, kind of the trauma, grief that people might have experienced, where they're coming from. And we know that can be hard to navigate as a person, but then also as a family. How does a family process it and deal with and navigate it? How does a school or a boarding program, whatever the context might be? So, how do you have any advice for those parents, those educators, resident assistants, and people who are seeking to walk alongside an MK in a loving way as they process through this grief, trauma, mental health, or deconstruction kind of situations, thoughts they're going through?
I think the first thing that we need to understand as adults of influence in the life of MKs who might be going through any of these is that the impetus for them to feel trauma, to have experienced trauma, or to go into deconstruction or to have mental health challenges, the impetus is real and concretely so to them. So a lot of times adults of influence looking at the responses that they're seeing in these MKs will think, well, that wasn't that big of a deal, or these small things
Mm,
shouldn't add up to what I'm seeing in you. And if trauma research has taught us anything, it's that the same family with 5 family members can go through the same event which causes trauma, and 4 of them might do absolutely fine with it, and the fifth one will not. And that doesn't mean that they're more vulnerable or that they're more fragile than the rest of the family, but it means that they internalized it as trauma. And the rest of the family, for whatever reason, for maturity level or temperament types or whatever reason, they were able to find their way through it without it being trauma. So that's the first thing I would say. It isn't weakness, it isn't fragility, it isn't lack of faith to see mental health challenges in the students and the children that we serve. The second thing I would say is avoid judging and certainly avoid verbalizing judgment. If you only did this, you would have been better
Mm.
off. Or if you
Mm.
just do this, you can cure yourself. I think we need to be the embodiment of what these people, these young people who are suffering, need. And sometimes that looks like offering both hope and help. So we sometimes, we adults who have been through something and come through to the other side and are now thriving and doing well and stable mentally, we need to tell our stories in a way that doesn't make them have to care for us. We need to tell our stories so that they know that there's an after picture and that this is not the end. We can be the embodiment of hope to them. We can point to other people, if it's not us, other people we know who have been through challenges like this and who have found their footing again, and then offering help. And offering help can range from spiritual, from praying with them and praying over them and being consistent in that way. It can be regular conversation, it can be mentoring. And I think this is a step we sometimes forget, because I know this to be true for myself. When I went into MK Care, I had a bit of a messiah complex, and I wanted to make sure that I was the person who had the solutions and led to healing. But sometimes the best thing we can do is be more triage than the emergency room doctor, and say, you know what, I see that this is big. I want to stay in relationship with you and mentor you, and we can keep talking about this. But maybe your next step could be, and then pointing them in the direction of the maybe clinical help they need, or talk therapy help they need, and not putting the burden on them of read these 3 books, because a lot of times when you're in the middle of a crisis, the ability to read and understand and internalize is greatly
Mhm.
limited. But
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
closeness and hope and help are the 3 things that I
Mhm.
would recommend.
I love that in addition to not shying away from what's difficult, you're also offering this positive
Yeah,
outlook in your honesty. Hope and help and closeness are
yeah,
words that connote, like, I care and I want to be in this
yeah,
with you, and also point you forward. And
yeah.
there's always a forward for all
Yes.
of us as we're continuing on this growth journey. And so as we sit with grief and challenge, we can also know that there is that hope and possibility.
That's exactly why I wanted to tell so much of my story in my book, because I feel like in some ways I'm the after picture. My life
Mm,
was not easy. I went
mm,
through family dysfunction, um, some forms of abuse growing up, huge faith challenges. I just could not imagine that God was good, or that he was near, or that he cared
mm.
about little old me, because I'm just an MK having to live up to
Mm,
stupid expectations that I couldn't reach. So I cover all of the wonderful as well. All of my castle days, all of my French pastry illustrations are in there. Everything that I would not give up for the world, even though there was this other side to it as well. And I put the other side in there because I think some of what I've learned that is specific to MKs and TCKs is something that might hopefully be able to help other TCKs too, and their
mm,
parents as they read the book
yeah,
and raise their children.
yeah, yeah, that's great. You defined some of the ships, as you call them, the words that end with ship that can help to shape the experience of an MK and maybe provide some of those steps forward. So, can you talk a little bit about those ships?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just list them and say something brief about each one of them. The first is relationship. We need to know that TCKs do relationships differently, and so significantly that it can actually hinder connection, especially when they go back to their passport cultures. So it's important for parents and the TCKs themselves to be aware of how they do things differently, of how it's perceived. We look way too intense to people who don't do things the way we do. We find them incredibly shallow. So there's a big divide there. So MKs and their parents, if they're aware of this, can start to consciously change the way they enter into relationships in new places to set themselves up. Eventually, it's going to take a lot longer than we're used to, but to set themselves up for lasting, meaningful relationships in a monocultural setting. Kinship has to do with belonging. We all, I think, as human beings, are wired for belonging, and TCKs find it difficult because maybe we're moving all the time, maybe the world around us is moving all the time, and we're purple. So where do we find a purple place? This is why TCK schools are such havens for TCKs, because the
Mhm.
purple rages on the school
Yeah.
campus. It's everywhere. So the belonging thing is difficult, because I actually believe that our greatest strength is in mostly belonging, not fully belonging. If we can
Mm,
mostly belong in multiple places, we become bridge builders and change makers. And then there are these other mostly belonging forms that we find, forms of attachment to a place, to a people group that we can find that are helpful. And those are nuclear belonging, which is just our family is our place of belonging. Kindred belonging, being with other people like us, is where we feel belonging. Diverse belonging. Some MKs will find their place of home or homeness in environments where they are the minority, because that's what they're
mhm,
used to. That
mhm,
feels like home to them. activist, joining groups that have a strong feeling about something and are pursuing justice or equality or whatever it is, that can feel like belonging to some TCKs and MKs. Relational belonging, these are the ones who get married when they're 18 because they've got their person and that at least is dependable in their lives. And then finally, internal belonging. This is where I've landed, but it's not necessarily the only one that's healthy. It's the mostly belonging that says all the places I've known and the people I love are inside of me. They have changed me and shaped me, and my belonging is internal now. I don't need to seek for it in external places. Citizenship has to do with that bridge building ability. Heirship has to do with where is our identity, and our identity is in Jesus. Our identity is in a faith that doesn't change according to culture. Ownership has to do with how we manage being a TCK. How are we good to
Mm,
ourselves? How do we live in our strengths? How do we become people who contribute positively to whatever setting we're in? And discipleship, this one was written specifically to parents. How can parents disciple their children in a way that the children see in their parents what their parents are trying to instill in their children? The
mm,
background to this is so many missionary parents are so busy and so overworked and stressed out that the children might hear about God and see them serving God and doing for God, but they might not see in their parents an abiding with God and depending on Him and spending time with Him and asking questions and receiving input from God. So those are the ships that end the book.
Throughout the book, you included some poetry and stories about individuals between the chapters of the books. How did you decide that that's what you wanted to do? And how have these been meaningful as you've been collecting them and putting them together for the book?
Yeah. The whole book is constructed like a three-act play. Probably because I used to teach theater, and
I
so it
was just
felt
thinking that.
natural to me. But also the 3 portions of the book, the middle portion especially, is where we hit some of the harder, darker subjects, and I wanted to be able to liven the book up and humanize the book a little bit, and art, of course, is a really natural way of doing that. So
Mhm.
there are 3 poems in it that are absolutely beautiful, written by TCKs that I really wanted to include. And then as interludes between the 3 sections, I have my favorite MK stories pulled from the headlines of my life from when I taught
Mm.
at Black Forest Academy. And I really wanted to tell those because they're so funny, as only MKs can be. And they're well intentioned and they go terribly wrong. One of them ends up with 13 police officers at my house with guns drawn. So
Yes.
if for nothing else, you want to get the book for that chapter.
Yep, yep.
But I think that art is a connective tool as well. So even if
Mm.
people who are reading the book might not relate to or connect with the research that's behind some of the topics in the book, hopefully they'll see themselves represented in the more artistic pieces that are included as well.
How can we better hold the tension? Like, how can we, as these people who are walking alongside MKs, what would be your advice, not about just about TCKs, but to the caregiver to do this well?
I think by admitting that it's there. We spend a lot of time in Christian circles and in TCK circles where we're to some degree surviving, trying to ignore the hard part so that we can report on and focus on the good part. And I think we need to hold both in the light. We need to not let one become less of our focus. We need to be able to do the flip sides in our own life, in our own perception of our own lives, to see that this is wonderful and to be conscious of there might be something else attached to it that I probably need to be aware of and to address if it needs addressing. If the children who are watching us and the teenagers who are watching us see us acknowledging both, and see us verbalizing it, not just trying to guess from our body language, what our understanding of flip sides is, but hear our words and see our wrestling, then it becomes normalized. And it becomes normalized in the lives of people that they view as maybe more capable of achieving the shoulds. And yet they're still wrestling with this tension between the wonderful and the hard. I think that we need to embody that for the young people who are watching us so that it gives them permission to accept both and to experience both. I don't think we realize how much just living in proximity to us is teaching the TCKs in our care about life and faith and holding the tension that we all feel.
That's really good. Thank you, Michelle. And that's so, yeah, so helpful to just acknowledging the tension and then living into it is so
Mhm.
helpful. Um, Michelle, thank you for joining us. We have one last question before we let you go. And this is what we ask all of our guests, even in the summer months. So, and that is, what is one thing that's changing your life right now? So this can be something big or small. something heavy or something light. You can kind of take it where you want to go. So I'll go first, and then it'll be Heather, and then you get to go last. So you get some time to think about it. And what's changing my life right now is I've been trying to wake up a lot earlier, which has been a big life change
Mm.
because I also normally stay up late. So I now have to figure out when I have to go to bed and then when I have to get stuff done after my kids go to sleep. So my whole schedule
Yeah.
is shifting, and I'm trying to figure out how to make that work. And it was actually even helpful. Is waking up earlier better than staying up late? I don't know. So
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
seen.
Like, what's the why behind this? Sometimes there's a real reason to do it, and sometimes it's because we think it's just better that you get up earlier.
Yeah, what they
Oh,
want us to believe.
interesting. Yes, that's great. Oh, man. Well, what's changing my life lately is actually I just recently stumbled across, I don't know, have you guys heard of Shane and Chain, the worship band? Like, they
Yeah.
have been around for a while. They now have Worship Initiative, which I really love their music. They actually have a daily, Monday to Friday, daily devotional that you can listen. They sing a verse or a chorus, and then they talk about scripture that relates to that, the concept in it, and then they sing the whole song. And they really invite you to like sing along with them, which may sound like a silly concept, but I love seeing songs that are so scripturally based and then to have them kind of talking through different parts of it. What about you, Michelle?
I would love to be really profound, and to some degree, I can be. The whole attachment theory is changing my life because I'm
Yeah.
understanding my life better, and it
Yeah.
expands into so many different areas of life. However, as we speak, I have some sourdough bread rising upstairs, and I'm way late to the party. Everybody else started the last time I was on the podcast. Everybody else started in the pandemic to do their sourdough experiment. But there's something about working with ingredients that are alive and unpredictable that reminds me of working with MKs, actually. Let's tie the whole thing up in a nice little knot. And it's just so much fun, and to experiment and to spend a whole day off and on going back to the kitchen and watching the progress and doing one thing and then waiting for the next ding to happen so you go back and do the next thing. I know it's silly, but it's giving me a lot of joy right now.
No, that's great.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us. Thank you for coming back and sharing all the new things you've learned and the new things you're discovering. It's so encouraging to hear.
Thank you for having me.
That was a great conversation. We don't get many return guests on the podcast, but you can see why
Yeah,
we asked for Michelle to come back.
definitely.
It is so helpful to think through these things as we work with so many people who are TCKs and have been shaped by growing up cross culturally. And I
Hmm.
really appreciate that Michelle doesn't just take her experience and extrapolate it over the entire TCK population, but has done so much
Hmm.
research and spending time with individuals. And it really
Yeah.
shows through the impact that she's had.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Kian and I serve with an organization called Teach Beyond. As you've heard, education plays a big role in missions, and Teach Beyond is a part of that.
As followers of Jesus, TeachMed is a global community providing transformational education services as part of God's ongoing mission to transform individuals and communities into all He intends.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media.
To help more people find the podcast and hear about Teach Beyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend. Be sure you're subscribed or following the show on the platform where you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next time.